limbo. So this is the hard part. We'll do this the next time we have a test. Are you ready for speed limbo? Are we ready? I got to gear myself up. Okay, here we go. No, not if you're ready. Right? And you're in the middle, so you can do it twice. John's in limbo. I know. Let us all down. After all we've been through. Together as a team. All right, so yes, it is limbo month. And I repeat, you will be begging for this in February. No? This is your only month. Hmm?
I'm really sorry, but 2 hip surgeries and probably a third are going to be really.
And my guess is it probably wouldn't be good.
Probably not.
Put that together.
Yeah.
Huh? No. Just December. It's a Festivus miracle. All right, so with that. Huh? Every day when I'm with you, it's kind of like that. Yeah. Aww. Every day, yes. It's a party. It's so nice. I'm not laughing at all behind that. Okay, with that. A couple things really quick. Before we get started, I will, we're not going to have a quiz today unless you really want one. But I am going to assign 599 to 531. And so
631.
So you have to go backwards. We're going backwards. You're going to get to, like, it's like reading the end of the book and then going back and finding out how it happened. 599 to 631. Is that better?
Yeah.
And so it's the fiery 50s. The events that led up, basically up to the election of 1860.
I really thought we were talking about the 1950s there. Like, how do we jump from 1850 to 1950?
And nothing big happened. Nothing big at all between 1850 and 1950. Hardly anything. Hmm? When's it due?
Yeah.
Should we say Monday?
Yeah.
Let's go for Monday. You want Friday?
No,
Friday.
Friday, okay, hold on, yeah.
I want for class.
So Owen will take the quiz on Friday, everybody else on Monday. Okay. 599 to 631, basically up to the election of 1860. And a couple more things. I did read today that the Omnicron variant. This is from Israel, so we'll see. You know, they don't know enough, but the first test for immunity for vaccinated people with a booster appears to be very good, but it appears to be very dangerous for people who are unvaccinated, and it appears to be even more dangerous than the other ones for unvaccinated people who have already caught coronavirus. It appears to be significantly more dangerous. It can evade those immunities, not kind of the broad spectrum that comes with a vaccine. So that's where we're at now, but we'll know more in about 3 weeks. Isn't that fun? Get a little time to wait and enjoy.
I just love everything all the time.
But truly, it's going to be a big difference between vaccinated and unvaccinated. But one other thing too, New York City, another day, nobody died of coronavirus because almost everyone is vaccinated.
It's almost like vaccines work.
They seem to be working, but I know a lot of people don't want to take them, and I'm not going to get involved in that argument, but they appear to be working quite well. Next, one more thing too, and I am going to say this. As you know, yesterday in Michigan, there was a school shooting and 10 people were shot. 3 people killed in Michigan. There, a potential scholarship, he was only 16. Yeah. But 3 people were killed, and clearly whatever classroom he wanted the shooter who unloaded half of a magazine of a semi-automatic pistol. So he wanted to get into a classroom and they wouldn't let him in. He tried to trick him and say he was a sheriff. And the class was actually some sort of video of this, and I'm not going to watch it. But that gets back to one thing, 2 things about that. First off, I know the drills can be annoying, and it's easy not to take them that seriously. And I don't want everyone to freak out, but pay attention to what you have to do during those drills. This is a phenomenon that did not exist when I was your age. And now it happens all the time. It's pretty amazing. When I was your age, there were significantly more murders, but we have much more cases of mass shootings in school shootings. It just did not happen when I was your age. So you're living in a different world. So I know it's easy to take those drills and kind of think, oh, why are we doing this again? And I'm not saying freak out whenever it happens, but pay attention, know what we have to do. Yes, Emily.
So when I lived in Great Falls, we would have like a real lockdown at least once a month, and like we had drills like every week just to have this lockdown. And so I feel like the drills are very different there than they are here. Do we cover different things because we just are less likely to have those things happen?
I don't know. I really don't know why it's different. I know we cover different things here. It's a different it's a balancing game. Because if you do it every week or every other week, you live in almost a constant state of fear, which is also unrealistic. But then again, if you don't have them enough, then you don't know what to do. I don't. I wish I did, but I don't. We're all going to go through that. You need to all be different elements of panic. So, which is, I laugh there, but I don't think it's funny. And so we just have to be ready. It just did not happen. And so it's just a phenomenon here, which is pretty amazing, because murders are so much lower now than what they were when I was your age. It's just amazing how much lower. How much there's a lot less violent crime, but mass events, partially because there's more weapons that can kill more. Yeah.
There was one in the Philippines in Moore, when most killed in this school shooting.
And where?
In Moore.
I can't remember that.
Yeah.
There's one in Lewistown.
That's the one.
Yeah, more. That's it. Really?
Yeah, she's
Oh God, a former teacher here was there in the building when that happened.
Yeah. There was a news coverage of it, and the principal, he was shocked. He didn't die. They did this story all about him. He called it frustrating. They just kind of briefly talked about it.
Well, the thing about it was that was national news. And now it's just like, okay, even though it's not quite that. God, I'm sorry, I vividly remember that. But I want to say something. I think it's important to say something about that. Oh, one more thing, they're doing oral arguments about reversing Roe versus Wade at this moment. And that is going to be a dramatic change for women coming up, because my guess is they're going to overturn it. So we're going through amazing times right now. We will come to the arguments about Roe versus Wade later on. Yeah.
What is the argument?
Roe versus Wade?
Yeah.
It was about abortion rights.
Oh, right.
Yeah. And we'll talk more about it because we're not there, and there's a lot of things behind it. And it's a very weird ruling back in 1973. It really is. It was so weird that one person who voted for it on the Supreme Court thought he was voting against abortion rights.
Oh.
It's so poorly written. So we'll get to it.
If they overturn it, will we lose all abortion rights? Or
No, it'll go to states. Montana will almost certainly ban it.
So then, will they ban it in 6 weeks, or will they ban it altogether?
Probably all together. But we'll see. They might just say 15 weeks. I really don't know. We're coming up to this is an amazing time. But Montana will almost certainly ban at least whatever the Supreme Court rules. They might say 15 weeks. They might say completely. So it's coming. And so let's get back to this. And we get to the 1970s. We will talk about the 60s and 70s. It's hard to get into a discussion about something until we get context. You know, we just don't know enough background. All of us, I always want to learn more too. So we got to 1848, the election. Who was elected president in 1848? Oh, rough and ready. And who was the Free Soil candidate? Van Buren. What was Lewis Cass, who vaguely looked like a what? Toad. It's amazing. We all remember that. What was his argument, or what was the Democratic position on slavery? what was it called? By letting people decide, let's say.
Popular sovereignty.
Yeah, popular sovereignty, which was a scam. It would actually open up these areas to slavery. We'll come back to that. And what general, all fuss and feathers, would lead American forces into Mexico City? Winfield stopped. And Santa Anna was captured. What was the treaty that he would eventually sign? Guadalupe Hidalgo. So let's go and get to this. We got to Bacon's Rebellion, right? Jamestown, right? Triangle trade, Middle Passage. Did we get to the slave ports? Did we talk about this?
Yes.
Oh, that's right where we quit, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And don't forget, this is actually this whole debtor thing really was a revelation for me. And I learned that this great archaeologist was going through the information about debt. It was really just, wow. That changed my whole way of thinking about it. They'd be taken to the ports. There'd be these slave ports. This is a Dutch trading port. The Dutch had one on the Gold Coast, which I remember on a map I had, the Slave Coast. That's what it was called. This was a slave coast for years. You still see a little element there, which is just kind of creepy, isn't it? And they would take in these forts, and eventually ships would anchor off the shore, and then they would roll the slaves out there. And the first thing they do when they got on board the ship, okay, they do this to be modest, but they would strip them naked. Because one thing about humans, we have clothes. That makes us human. Taking off the clothes, humiliating people like that is a way to break them. A way to break them, to take away their humanity, so they don't revolt on the ship. These revolts on slave ships were all the time. You can imagine the panic in trying to get off that ship. And also think about what that does. From day one, you're not the same as me. You're lower. I have clothes on. I feel protected. I feel civilized. You're inferior and naked. They'll show all these pictures with something here. Remember, they're totally naked, regardless of the weather and climate. And you think about it, they're packed in these ships, and so there's no bathroom facility, so it's all over. This is also done to dehumanize them, to have them in a state of constant misery. And brought on board, chain, you see different kinds of chains right here, and led down deck. Sometimes they'd be branded, but most of the time the branding would come afterwards, but it's very routine to brand slaves. A combination of torture, but also mine, just like they brand cattle. And this is a type packer. Almost all the slave ships are type packers. And there'd be two decks or floors, the main deck and then a sub deck on top about 3 feet above. And they would chain everyone down because they learned real fast. It didn't matter if you had slaves relatively out in the open or packed tightly. Well, humans, not slaves, because they're kidnapped people. About a third are going to die. Maybe half. The shock, the hell of this, the immeasurable terror that was going on with people, a third would die, half would die. So they did this horrible logic, the horrible logic of business, because it's all for money. The more we pack in, the more money, the more people survive, the more money we make. So pack them in. And yes, they're all going to be naked, but they show them some kind of loincloth or something. Chain down. And for the first couple of days, keep them chained down. Don't let them move. Because that's the most dangerous time. Before they really break them. But the big thing is then eventually let them come up on the deck. And I'll talk about that in a second. These are ultra type packers. Here and here. Either sitting or kneeling. That was actually the most common. It's kind of a stress position. It's torture. If you have someone like that, they're in so much agony, they really can't resist. You're in this position for 5 days. You can't function. And so many ships, especially after once the British banned the slave trade in 1807, more and more became ultra-type packers. Because the idea was, well, the British might catch it. The British did a lot of things, that I would say that are bad. But they did go after slave ships. The United States banned it, but did not do this because we didn't have a Navy. The British did. Here is after a significant number had died. There started to be more room. They were planned that way. That as they crossed the Atlantic, they would eat less food every day. They planned it. And if they didn't plan right, if more survived than they thought, they would just go through and call the herd. That's literally what they called it. You know what I mean when I say call the herd? Call means find the ones you figure won't make money and throw them over. This was the norm. Sharks would follow these boats. And so, this was this is supposed to be an anti-slavery journal of them pulling up a slave. This would be normally done the first time they would bring them on deck. So after about 3 days, they can't see the shore anymore. So that was just, I mean, the terror that must have been. They bring them on deck, and this would become one every other day usually. This could be a 6-week journey, depending on the wind. They throw salt water on them, which, by the way, imagine all the scars are going to have, how bad that would hurt. But throw salt water on them to clean them off a little bit, have them dance and move around to get blood circulating. But they would almost always take someone that first time and string them up and torture them to death. As an example, to terrify everybody else. And so this, a shot of Beaton, it's another one from Anti-Slavery Journal. This is the best picture I have. This is from the 19th century. So once again, they're wearing, it kind of looks like they're wearing cut-off pants, but remember, they're all naked. And here they are on shore. By the way, there'd always be a cannon filled with grape shot or canister in case of the rebel. You could shoot into them and stop the rebellion. Always. There's someone ready with a ready to light the fuse. I mean, like ready whenever they would bring them up. And you notice the netting? Well, this shows what's going to happen. What did a lot of the people who are kidnapped and absolutely without hope do? Throw themselves over. So to keep them from doing that, they put netting on the side of the ship. And here is somebody, now they would force feed those who said, I'm not going to eat. But this appears to be more than force feeding there on the right. That appears to be torture for them. Dumping boiling water. That's what it appears to be. But they would also jam a pipe down their throat and force feed them. This is money. Human life is money to them. This is why in 1808 the United States could say, we're no longer involved with this horrible trade. Because there was no way, no justification, including what was Calhoun's unbelievable, but his justification of slavery, what did they call that? That positive good theory? No way you say this is civilizing people. So after 1808, the United States could say, see, we don't do that anymore. We're good. Yes, they still went around it, but I'll show you that in a sec. And here's another shot. This throwing overboard, either dead bodies or here's somebody being thrown overboard, probably she's sick, or they just ran out of food. So they just would go through and just, you're probably not going to make it, you're not going to make it, you're not going to make it. Awesome. Or if a British ship was coming. There's stories of a British ship coming, was coming, and they could see them over their horizon. They would just see the flag. They'd throw everybody off. Yeah, this trade, it's hard to even wrap your mind around it, how awful it was. So this is the start, break them, get them across, and then when they would arrive, remember most went to the Caribbean or Brazil, but Charleston, New Orleans, wherever it might be, Savannah. And here, getting on board the ship, it would be sold. I like this picture because it shows us just the way they wrote it. 94 prime healthy Negroes consisting of, and the men bore the boys, etc. That's from 1769 in Charlestown, which is now Charleston, South Carolina. And when they get on board, they would actually wait a few days before they'd sell them, try to get as much really high carbohydrate, a little bit of protein, so they get a little bit healthier. And then before they're sold, they would cover them with lard. So cover them with lard in a way kind of makes them look healthier and fitter. But the big thing is it hides the scars. So it hides things. And so that's what that boom, cover them, and then sell them. And they said that's one thing I like about the video. Teeth go like just like you're checking any other animal that might be owned. And this is in Georgia, but slave market being waited to sold. By the way, this is a good one. You notice I'll have that. it was, especially after 1831, they all had to wear a little ID badge. All blacks did, free or slave. So they didn't have that, they're a slave, and you sold it. We'll talk about that. Yeah, 1808, though, the United States banned the slave trade, so we say, we don't do that anymore. And remember, the whole thought was at first, we'll diffuse the slaves out to get rid of them, but actually it turned out to be the exact opposite. This is the whole picture from the Anti-Slavery Journal, the British Anti-Slavery Almanac. But this is the international slave trade, and you know, even after 1808, the slave numbers were pretty high. The British started aggressively patrolling the coast of Africa right here. They even destroyed a few of the slave forts, and that's when the numbers fall. So people kidnapped in Africa would be brought to, let's say, Cuba. And what would happen there was really common is they'd be taken in Cuba, and they would make up fake names for them, fake manifests, and then go to the United States and sell them, saying they were already slaves in Cuba, you were just selling them in the United States. So they weren't kidnapped in Africa to avoid the ban on the slave trade. And that happened all the time. So this is the horrific system that slaves were brought into, but by 1830, most of the slaves in the United States were born in the United States as slaves. Does that make sense? Oh, I should add, what's more valuable? The men, boys, women, or girls? In the short term, boy, males are a little bigger, so maybe a little more work, but the girls were really valuable. Young girls will have what? Remember the fornication laws? Doesn't matter who the father is. That's more slaves. And they looked at it that way. They're making money for us. So, they thought slavery would go away. But just to repeat, I can't emphasize this enough. The slave trade. I'm sorry, the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution and that demand for cotton, all of a sudden the slaves become profitable. The mills, at first in Britain, but then in New England, needed cotton. But still, except for along the South Carolina coast, where they had this long strain of cotton, they just pick it off the cotton's in a fluff. All the cotton's going to be grown here has to be broken away from the seed, very labor intensive. What's the machine that would meet the demand of the Industrial Revolution? So there's one of the first mock-ups of the cotton gin. And look what happens with the production of the cotton, or with the introduction of the cotton gin and more land in cultivation. 334,000 bales of cotton here, 4.5 million bales by 1860. Now the price would deviate, supply and demand, but still, that gives you an idea of how much cotton and how valuable, therefore, the labor, these human capital, was worth. And so Eli Whitney, as we know, invented it. This is the actual patent for it. And it had bristles on here and bristles here. They would dump the cotton in here, and then they would turn this crank, and the bristles, they would go around like this, and the bristles would kind of rip the seed off. Gravity would knock the seed to the bottom, and cotton fluff would come out. At first, the original cotton gin could do the work of 10 people. One person turning could do the work of 10. By 1860, it could do the work of 100. And so therefore, slaves, you could get a lot of, what do you call the amount of work that somebody does? Remember I told you that? Productivity. More productivity. The slaves can produce more per hour of work. And there's Eli Whitney to meet the demand. And the thing is, the demand for slaves are going to skyrocket. Because now we can really make a lot of money per slave. That's the key element. A lot of money per slave. Before, because it's so labor intensive, they wouldn't make that much money for slaves because they kept having to break the seeds off. Now, just turn that crank. And this is the actual patent, which would give Eli Whitney a monopoly for a short time. And here's a couple pictures. I always appreciate this one. This is a picture from the 1860s, but it's showing them dumping the cotton in. And it also shows an element of the positive good theory. Do you see it? Look how happy they are. I'm a slave. Yay, this is great. Part of the positive good theories that imply that the slaves, once they're broken, like slavery. And here is a picture from a textbook from the 1960s. So this was used well into the 1970s. And look at it. I mean, she's just, this is great. But one more thing that's really important. Not only she seemed to be relatively pleased with it, they like to draw slaves as relatively like well-fed, implying how are the slaves being treated? Being treated well. Was that the truth? No. Slaves are going to be skinny as a rail. Protein will always be a price. I mean, imagine your entire life just being hungry. That was a slave. Not quite. A couple exceptions. I'll get to it. Here's another picture. Look how happy they are with the cotton gin. That's the positive good theory right there. Yes, they still use almost exactly the same cotton gin. Now it's powered by an electric motor, but they use the same thing. Just bigger, faster, but it's an electric motor. So what we have then, king cotton. King cotton. Cotton became king, the moneymaker of the South. And the black belt was this belt of really black, rich, fertile soil. And you can see it actually by the amount of cotton being grown here. In fact, because so many of the slaves, they kind of got this, slaves, when they'd be marched down here to work in these slave labor camps, they called it downriver. This was downriver to the black belt. So don't think about, just think of the soil, the rich, good soil. And still there. And that just gives you an idea how much production was here. Here, cotton, tobacco. Right in the middle, at this time, wasn't good for various, for cotton or tobacco, so corn to feed the slaves. Here, the long stem corn, there's also rice here too. So this is the biggie. Look at the percentage of slaves. This shows you the percentage of the population. Remember, they had to do a census every 10 years. So this is 1860. If you knew nothing else about the events leading up to the Civil War, nothing, and looked at this picture, who seceded first? The green, that's percentage of whites. Blue, slaves. Red, free blacks. South Carolina. You don't need to know any other thing except that. 57% of the population. 57%. What's the second state to secede? Mississippi. Exactly. That's where Jefferson Davis had his plantation. And then these states here all came about the same time. Texas was kind of an aberration about how they came into the Union. They came next. Then you notice these states with the percentage lower, the upper South it's sometimes called, they came after Fort Sumter was fired upon. We'll get to that in April 1861. And the states with the lowest percentage of slaves, Delaware had 200 slaves total. They stayed in the Union. That's all you need to know. There are more people in the South reliant upon slaves for their source of income, for their way of life. Therefore, slaveholders have more political power. Slaveholders are not important in Delaware. They're not as important in Maryland. But slaveholders control the legislature in the Deep South. They control it. South Carolina, it's all slaveholders. So more political power. There are more people there with more to lose. More people there with more to lose. The problem is this. Most people didn't have slaves. Most free people did not have slaves. So it's not a very good argument to convince people who are not going to have slaves to say, but aren't you worried about a few very wealthy plantation owners losing their money? Don't you care? Like, no. Maybe some do, but maybe someday I'll be the big plantation owner. What's their greatest fear? Don't forget, the greatest fear is slave rebellion. Where is the greatest threat of slave rebellion? Where the percentage of slaves is highest. And even though the vast majority of free people, mostly white in South Carolina, will never have slaves, Can you imagine them being just as scared of slave rebellion as anybody else? Especially once color of skin comes to define free and not free. This was a way to get poor whites on board the pro-slavery bandwagon. That combined with maybe someday you can have a slave. Remember Bacon's rebellion? It goes all the way back to that kind of thinking. Don't forget, we are the sum of our parts. We are the sum of our background, our history. And so the South of South Carolina is the sum of what happened back in colonial America, just as the current situation were the sum of those parts now. And by the way, if you don't know the past, those who do will take advantage of you. I try not to, but I guess I might be a little bit, but I'm not. At least I'm not consciously telling you I am. No, okay, moving. That's my joke. So, look how profitable it was, though. Nearly 60% of all the exports was cotton. Look at this graph here. All exports. And look how the U.S. is exporting more. Look at cotton. Cotton is the vast majority. And that's not even, and then we throw tobacco in there. So think about the northern industry. There's a lot of argument, like after the Civil War, they say, well, the northern industry was dominating. No, they're making a heck of a lot of money. A heck of a lot of money off of this. We'll come back to how this money is spent. But cotton was king. This is why they thought they'd win the Civil War. You can understand how they would get very arrogant about this. Britain needs our cotton, and they will intervene with their powerful navy, and we'll win. And it almost happened, which I know seems counterintuitive because Britain was against slavery. So that is why there's no industry in the South. Now this is where the North would say, look how superior we are, we have industry. No. The money that could be used for the machines was wrapped up in humans and land. The excess money, or big mansions. All their excess money was wrapped up in humans. So when they made money, buy more slaves, more cotton, more wealth. And so this is the Trefeter Iron Works in what's the capital? Richmond, Virginia. That's why they're anti-tariff. If there's no industry to protect, they want to trade. They don't want Britain to sell less textiles because they're selling their cotton to Britain. In 1816, Calhoun was all for the tariff. But when the Industrial Revolution showed him, wow, we have a different way to make money, in 1833, he led the effort to destroy the country to stop the tariff, to defend slavery. That's how fast it shifted. It was 16 and a half years. So with that, the South is going to be anti-internal improvements because that requires tax money. They're not going to want money for railroads or canals. Actually, they have a lot of railroads. But they're not going to want this stuff. So they're opposed to the tariff. I should add, by no means isn't this enough to go to Civil War. But it's the slavery part. But there's reasons why. And therefore they're anti-tax. Any tax on wealth could be a tax on slavery. So they're anti-tax. And this legacy exists to this day. In southern states, their tax codes in almost every southern state are designed to tax working people much more than wealthy people. Sales tax. Sales tax just hammers working people. The wealthy people pay only much. And so, I was just reading about the tax system of Texas, by the way. Working people hammered. Wealthy, almost none. That's on purpose. They have a reason for it. It's called trigonal economics. It's also confusing. But, and then lastly, this is why, if you go to the South, it's kind of anti-government. This legacy goes back there. Now, when it gets to Reconstruction, there'll be another reason for anti-government. And so anti-public institutions, there'll be less money in the South, for example, put into schools or roads or public transport. And the one that always hits me about public transportation is, we don't do much in this country for public transportation, but Atlanta, has anyone ever been to Atlanta? I mean, it's just all highways. It's really, really, really hard to get around, unless you like to be in traffic jams. Atlanta's just sprawled out because everyone has to drive a car everywhere. And I think about that compared to, New York City has some flaws in the subway system, but you jump on the subway and go pretty much anywhere you want to go. Hey, yeah, be crowded in with a bunch of people, and I know as I wear a mask, there's going to be issues about that. And it's always a big contrast if you go to like Paris, and you literally jump on the subway and you go anywhere you want. I won't lie, I like subways. I think they're cool. Unless you're in a subway that's stopped all of a sudden in the middle of tracks and the lights go off, then it's a little scary. Is anyone claustrophobic? Yeah, it's a little disconcerting.
Are you speaking from personal experience?
Yes.
No.
Yeah, that happened in Paris to me in 2001. We were stuck in the subway, my wife and I, and the lights went on, and then all of a sudden, like, this baby started crying, the loudest I think I've ever heard. And it just made this surreal moment. And it probably only lasted like 3 minutes, but it seemed like 40 to 50 hours. And I did just grab them. I'm a little claustrophobic, and it started to bug me, like everything's closing in. And then I was like, subways are great. So, but what about the North? The North is quite a contrast. There is industry in the North. There's the development of a different style, this idea that government aid for business, at least, was important. And we come to different arguments about that. But look at this graph of showing workers, factories, value of goods produced, railroads, textiles, firearms, and pig iron. Pig iron is necessary for the development of steel. Look how much in the North in 1860 in the South. This is the one that's really dramatic. Value of goods produced, so manufactured goods, 1.5 billion to 155 million in 1860 dollars. Now, doesn't mean the South couldn't have still won, but boy, that's a big enemy. So a big argument against the South win. So that means the whole financial institution is going to be developed in the South. Or in the North, I'm sorry, in the North. Finance, banks. The vast number of population, as we saw, 31 to 9 million by 1860. And it appeared, it gave the feeling that wealth was growing in the North. Now I want to be clear about it. Wealth was growing in the North, but the wealth would be future wealth. In 1860, the richest people in America were plantation owners. And they're terrified about losing what they have. And so you get this idea that it just seems like, it feels like, even though we're on top, they're catching us. It feels like we're losing in the South, and that made the South feel like a permanent minority section. A permanent minority. We are growing weaker, and every day they get stronger. So in 1860, sure, the plantation owners are wealthy. There's a lot of wealth in the hands of a few people in the South. We feel wealthy. But tomorrow we won't be as wealthy. And in 10 years, we'll be even less wealthy compared to the North. And someday we'll be on the bottom. Someday, even though we're on top now, someday we can see it happen. So they don't see it like everyone growing together at once. They see it as this. Here's the thing. If today, you might be strong today, but today you think your enemies, today you think this, my enemies are going to be a lot stronger than me in a decade. Today I'm strong, but in a decade I'll be weak and they'll be able to take me. What does that make you want to do today? If you sincerely believe in 10 years they're going to kill me, what are you going to do today? Say it again. Yeah, attack, secede, fight. So there's this desperation in the South by 1860. We're strong today, but in 10 years we won't. And this thinking is actually really scary. There's another country in 1914 that felt the exact same way and would help trigger Armageddon. What country? Germany. Yes. Germany felt that way. Our enemies like Russia will be stronger. France will be stronger. Let's strike now. That's exactly the way the South felt. They didn't see it as we're going to destroy the Union. They saw it as defensive. They're going to get us. So, this is the beginning of capitalism. Capitalism, machines, labor, but it's different. You have the capitalists not owning machines, the capital are what? Human beings. And this is the value in billions of dollars of slaves. And so you see the first impact of the first beginnings of the Industrial Revolution in Britain, the value of slaves skyrocketed. By the way, it was right here when Calhoun says, let's have a tariff. It was right here when he said, we don't need a tariff anymore. Wow, am I rich? The big growth of American textiles, demand for cotton, therefore slaves went up. Here's 1850s. By the way, slave value started going down right before the Civil War, which terrified them. Why? There was a panic. Panic of 1857. So think about, I'm rich, but things are dropping. I'm scared, but the humans are capital. So this is proto or like embryonic or the starting of capitalism. So more slaves equals more wealth. Just simply the way it was. And that's something they could tell poor, mostly whites, for free. Someday you can have the slaves. Someday you can, but not they won't. And here's the thing about wealth. So you take the richest human beings in the world today. Who are the richest? Give me one really super rich person. So Bezos. You say the same thing with Elon Musk, who went from almost nothing, only about $30 billion. I mean, he was almost poor when the pandemic began until about $300 billion. Boy, the pandemic itself very well. Not teachers. Isn't that weird? But in another dark way, I'm laughing. But take Bezos. Bezos doesn't have like a big room full of cash. Of course, they have $300 billion of cash. That'd be a hell of a room, don't you think? He has stocks. He has things that are valuable, just like the slaveholders. He doesn't have cash. He has valuable things, really valuable things, mostly stock. And where does he get money from? But they usually roll that right back into stock, more stock. Even though that's a very good point. But even then, he just the value of the stock goes up. He doesn't get money. Where does he get the money to buy his mansions or his rockets? Good guess, but no. They borrow. They use the stock as collateral and borrow. That's what they're doing here. They're using the slaves as collateral, borrow. Because the slaves would be valuable. You see the fear of the slaveholders if they get rid of slavery. If they get rid of slavery, they still got to pay back their debts. And now, where the money going to come from? But that's how, like Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk. They don't have cash. But the way we think about it, like earning a paycheck, they use their stock and borrow. So they keep rolling into the stock. There's tax purposes and all that. We're not going to go into tax law, which is terrible. For very good reason. But, so this is where we get the pushing system or the quota system. So these plantations are basically slave labor camps. And yes, they had a nice mansion to make it look like an English country home, but then they hid the slave labor system. And the textbook mentioned pushing or the quota system. And this is something that tells about history. I've heard people who don't really understand history. They're kind of clueless. But they say, well, history, it's just all the same facts and figures, and what do you need a new textbook, for example? So the textbook I gave you, I have been using this textbook for 23 years, this version of the textbook. These are different editions, but the first one I got was like the first or second edition. And this is the 10th edition. They're up to the 12th or 13th edition now. They sell new editions so they can make more money. So, but we have a 10. For the first 8 editions, they never mentioned the pushing system. And the whole vision of slavery will change dramatically once you know about the pushing system. It changes everything. And so if people think of the history, they don't know new stuff or emphasize different things, or the history of the ideas of interpretations doesn't change, they either don't know what they're talking about or don't want you to reinterpret history. They don't want you to learn something new. By the way, it's a good textbook. I know it has to be full of facts. It can be boring. And they have to get, and I make you read like 599 to 631, which is not as good as reading it on your own. But as textbooks go, it's a very good textbook. For example, the Helen High textbook, the Patchett book, it's fine. I don't like it, but it's as much. It's also twice as expensive. It doesn't mention the pushing system. How does the pushing system work? When slaves would get to a plantation in the South, let's say they were marched overland from Virginia where there was a surplus of slaves, they're exhausted, they're beat. They would spend about a week feeding them, building up their strength. So that was the exception to the terrible food. Build up their strength, and then send them out to the field. And they'll take a day or two to practice how to pick cotton. And then they'll say, okay, this is the day we're going to record the number. So this is how it works. They have you go out there, you're fed, you're all fed, and they say, all right, work. And they kind of push you, they put you next to someone who worked really fast, and you pick cotton, put it in a big long bag that would hang behind you. Pick the cotton. They show them here with bushel sacks, but a lot of times it'd be a canvas bag, so they just stuff it in and drag it behind you. And then when you're done, they'd weigh that cotton, and that would give you your number. Everyone got that? Then what's going to happen the next day? What do you have to do? Meet that number, or what's going to happen? You're going to be beaten. You will be severely whipped, almost always by other slaves. Almost always. You will be beaten until you make that number. And by the way, what happens to the quality of food you were given? It will go down dramatically. Once they got you to get as high as number as possible, then you go to kind of a wheat gruel or corn gruel with very little protein. So it's going to be harder to meet that number. So what are you going to do? If you're a slave in this situation, you'll come up with ways to become more efficient, won't you? Save as many motions as possible to pick as much as possible. Then when you make that quota a couple days, what do? This is where the pushing comes in. They push the number up. So what do you got to do? You meet that number or you're beaten. Once you make it, they push it up. Make that number or you're beaten, and push it up, and push it up, push it up, push it up. That's why it's called the pushing system. Has everyone got that? Now, my vision of slavery, I don't know if it was yours. I remember learning about slavery, when you first hear about it, probably in elementary school. And I had this vision of something like this. Slaves working, and like an overseer with a whip, work harder, work harder. Do you need that for the pushing system? Who's going to motivate the slaves to figure out better ways to pick cotton? They are. They will motivate themselves to increase their productivity because they know they'll be severely beaten if they don't. That totally changes the way slavery worked. It is, in a way, also much more insidious. They have an incentive to get more wealth for the employer, more wealth for the owner, or they will be severely whipped. By the way, you can always tell a slave that was whipped a lot, that was somebody who said, I don't care about your quota. Then they're beaten severely. So, beat the quota or torture. That's it. The whole system operates with the threat of torture. Increase productivity. Did it increase productivity? Oh, yeah. And on that, but doesn't this, wouldn't you say the pushing system, doesn't your view of slavery, that's like, oh, okay. That's how they're able to make it work. Because to be honest with you, if I had to stay all the time on you, write that down, write that down, write that down, would that work? Eventually, as soon as I turn my back, what are you gonna do? Yeah. But if I say, if this isn't completed by the time I'm done, you're beat, what are you gonna do? I'm not gonna do that. Yeah. No. Yeah, but they would use stocks, torture positions, but the big one thing is just, let's be clear, whip, beat. And on that happy note, should we limbo